I never imagined those words would come from my son's mouth. Never. Not in 72 years of living, not through all the sacrifices I made, all the meals I cooked, all the nights I stayed awake worrying. But there they were, hanging in the air like poison. "Mom, you're just taking up space." He said it casually, as if commenting on the weather, while scrolling through his phone in what used to be my living room. My son Daniel. The boy I'd raised alone after his father died. The child I'd worked 3 jobs to put through college. Standing in the doorway of my own kitchen, telling me I was nothing more than an inconvenience taking up valuable square footage. That moment changed everything. Because when someone tells you you're taking up space, they're really saying you don't matter. They're saying your presence has no value. That the very air you breathe is wasted. And I decided right then that if they thought I was taking up space, I'd show them what space really meant. I'd show them exactly how much space one supposedly insignificant old woman could command. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning because every betrayal has a backstory, and mine goes back 43 years. I was 29 when my husband Michael died. Daniel was only 6 months old, and suddenly I was a widow with a baby, a mortgage, and exactly $300 in our savings account. Michael had been a construction worker, and back then there wasn't much life insurance, no safety net to catch us when we fell. I remember sitting in our tiny apartment, Daniel sleeping in his bassinet, and thinking I had 2 choices: collapse or survive. I chose survival. I always chose survival. Those early years blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and determination. I worked as a waitress during breakfast and lunch shifts, then cleaned offices at night. Daniel stayed with my neighbor Mrs. Chun during the day and slept in a portable crib I kept in the office building's break room at night. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't even good. But it was what I could manage, and I managed it because that's what mothers do. We figure it out. We make it work. We sacrifice everything, including ourselves, for our children. By the time Daniel was 5, I'd saved enough to put a down payment on a small house. Nothing fancy. A 2-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood that was more hopeful than prosperous, but it was ours. I remember Daniel's face when I told him we were moving into our own house. His eyes went wide with wonder, and he asked if he'd have his own room. His own room. Such a small thing, but to a child who'd spent his whole life in cramped apartments and makeshift arrangements, it was everything. I took a job at the elementary school cafeteria, because it meant I could be on the same schedule as Daniel. The pay was terrible, but I was there when he got on the bus in the morning and there when he got home in the afternoon. I picked up evening shifts at the grocery store to make ends meet, but those precious after-school hours were ours. We did homework together at the kitchen table. I helped him with his science projects and listened to him read aloud, even when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. When Daniel was 12, he got interested in computers. This was the late 90s when having a home computer was still a luxury, not a necessity. I watched him at the library, hunched over the public terminals, completely absorbed in learning programming languages and figuring out how software worked. He had a gift. Even I could see that, and I knew nothing about technology. So I did what any mother would do. I found a way. I took on a 3rd job, weekend shifts at a nursing home, and saved every penny for 6 months. On Daniel's 13th birthday, I gave him a computer. Not a new one, I couldn't afford that, but a refurbished model that I'd bought from a computer repair shop, where the owner had taken pity on me and given me a deal. Daniel cried when he unwrapped it. Actual tears streaming down his face. He hugged me so hard I could barely breathe and he whispered, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. I'm going to make you so proud someday." And he did make me proud. He excelled in school, especially in math and science. He got a full scholarship to the state university to study computer science. I cried at his high school graduation, watching him walk across that stage, knowing everything I'd sacrificed had been worth it. This was the dream, wasn't it? To give your child a better life than you had? To watch them succeed and thrive and become someone who mattered in the world? College was good for Daniel. He made friends, joined clubs, threw himself into his studies. I continued working my jobs, sending him what money I could for books and expenses, making sure he never had to worry about anything except his education. He'd come home during breaks and tell me about his classes, his projects, the things he was learning. I didn't understand half of it, but I listened with pride swelling in my chest. My son. My brilliant, accomplished son. After graduation, Daniel got a job at a tech company in the city, about 2 hours from where I lived. Good salary, benefits, the whole package. He moved into an apartment with some college friends, and I saw him less frequently, but we talked on the phone every week. He'd tell me about his work, the projects he was leading, the promotions he was getting. His voice would get excited when he talked about stock options and career trajectories and networking opportunities. I didn't fully understand it all, but I was happy he was happy. Then he met Vanessa. She was a marketing executive at a different tech company, ambitious and polished in a way that made me feel suddenly aware of my worn hands and discount store clothes. Daniel brought her home for Christmas when they'd been dating for 6 months, and I could tell immediately that she'd already decided I wasn't good enough. She smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. She complimented my house in a tone that made it sound like an insult. She asked about my career as if the 35 years I'd spent keeping my son fed, housed, and educated didn't count as real work. But Daniel loved her, so I tried. I invited them to dinner, though Vanessa always found reasons why they couldn't come. I sent birthday cards and called to check in. When they got engaged after dating for a year, I offered to help with the wedding in any way I could. Vanessa thanked me politely, and then proceeded to plan an event that cost more than I'd earned in the last 5 years. I scraped together money to buy them a gift from their registry, some ridiculously expensive cookware set they'd probably never use, and tried to feel included in their happiness. The wedding was beautiful and cold, like Vanessa herself. I sat at a table in the back with some of Daniel's distant relatives I'd never met, watching my son marry a woman who looked at me like I was an embarrassing obligation. During the mother-son dance, Daniel held me stiffly, and I could see Vanessa watching from the side, her expression carefully neutral. I tried to tell Daniel I loved him, that I was proud of him, but he just nodded and said, "Thanks, Mom." Like I'd complimented his tie, not raised him from infancy through devastating grief and poverty. Something changed after the wedding. The weekly phone calls became monthly. The visits became twice a year. When I'd call Daniel's number, Vanessa would often answer and tell me he was busy, that he'd call me back later. He rarely did. I tried not to feel hurt. I told myself they were newlyweds building their life together, focused on their careers. But there was a hollow ache in my chest that grew a little bigger each time my calls went unreturned. 2 years after the wedding, Daniel called with news. Vanessa was pregnant. I was going to be a grandmother. The joy I felt was overwhelming, immediate, and all-consuming. A grandchild. A new generation. A second chance to pour my love into someone who might love me back without reservation. I drove to the city that weekend with bags full of baby supplies I'd been collecting from yard sales and clearance racks. I'd crocheted a blanket in soft yellow and white, working on it every evening after my shifts. Vanessa accepted the gifts with a tight smile, and thanked me in a voice that suggested I'd brought her something mildly distasteful. "Oh," she said, holding up the crocheted blanket, "handmade? How rustic." Then she set it aside and showed me the designer nursery they put together. Everything matching and expensive and perfect. I felt small and foolish standing there with my discount store offerings. When my granddaughter Emma was born, I wasn't there. Vanessa's parents were in the delivery room, but I got a text message 3 hours after the birth with a photo and basic statistics. I cried alone in my house, holding my phone, looking at the face of my granddaughter and feeling the distance between us like a physical weight. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more about standing up for yourself, consider subscribing. I've got more tales to tell. I tried to be involved in Emma's life. I offered to babysit, to help out however they needed. Vanessa always had a reason why it wasn't a good time. They had a nanny. Vanessa's mother was already coming over. Emma was on a very specific schedule that couldn't be disrupted. The message was clear. My help wasn't wanted. My presence wasn't desired. But I kept trying because that's what you do when you love someone. You keep showing up, even when you're not welcome. Emma was 3 when everything changed. I was 69 years old, still working part-time at the grocery store because my Social Security checks didn't quite cover all my bills. The house needed repairs I couldn't afford. The roof was leaking in 2 places. The furnace was making concerning noises. I was tired, the kind of tired that settles into your bones and never really leaves. But I was managing. I always managed. Then I fell at work. It was stupid, really. Someone had spilled something in the produce section, and I didn't see the wet floor sign until I was already sliding. I hit the ground hard, felt something snap in my hip, and suddenly the ceiling tiles were spinning above me. The next few days were a blur of hospital rooms and doctors explaining that I'd fractured my hip and would need surgery and months of physical therapy. No more standing for long shifts. No more lifting boxes. No more steady paycheck from the grocery store. Daniel came to the hospital, which surprised me. He sat in the uncomfortable visitor's chair and looked concerned in the way people look when something inconvenient has happened. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk about your situation. Your situation." As if my broken hip was a problem I'd created rather than an accident that could happen to anyone. I was released from the hospital after 4 days with a walker, a list of restrictions, and a follow-up appointment I wasn't sure how I'd get to. My neighbor, Mrs. Chun, the same woman who'd watched baby Daniel 43 years ago, came to check on me that first day. She took one look at my house, at the stairs leading to the only bathroom, at the kitchen I could barely navigate with my walker, and her face creased with worry. "Margaret," she said gently, "you can't manage alone here." I knew she was right, but the alternatives terrified me. Assisted living facilities cost money I didn't have. Nursing homes were for people who were really old, really sick. I was just temporarily disabled. I'd heal. I'd figure it out. I always figured it out. Daniel called that evening. "Mom, Vanessa and I have been talking. We think you should move in with us for a while. Just until you're back on your feet." The relief I felt was overwhelming. My son. My family. They were going to take care of me the way I'd taken care of Daniel his entire life. "Thank you," I said, my voice breaking. "Thank you so much. I know this is a lot to ask. We'll come get you this weekend," he said, cutting me off. "Pack what you need for a few months." Moving into Daniel and Vanessa's house should have been a blessing. They had a beautiful home in an upscale suburb, one of those modern constructions with open floor plans and expensive finishes everywhere. They'd bought it 2 years earlier, and Daniel had told me proudly that they'd paid $800,000 for it. I couldn't even conceptualize that much money. My little house had cost $60,000 when I bought it, and I'd thought that was an astronomical sum. They set me up in what they called the guest room, a small bedroom on the first floor, next to the laundry room. It was clearly meant for short-term visitors, decorated impersonally with bland artwork in neutral colors. But it had a bathroom right next door, and I didn't have to navigate stairs, so I was grateful. That first week, I tried to be helpful despite my limitations. I could fold laundry sitting down. I could sort mail. I could keep Emma company while coloring at the kitchen table. Vanessa hated it. I could tell from the way her mouth tightened whenever she came home and found me in the common areas. She'd smile that cold smile and say, "Margaret, you don't need to do that. You should rest." But what she meant was, "Stay in your room where I don't have to look at you. Stay out of my space. Don't leave evidence that you exist." Emma at least seemed happy I was there. She'd come into my room after preschool and show me her artwork, tell me about her day, ask me to read her stories. She'd curl up next to me on the bed. And for those moments, I felt less like an unwanted burden and more like a beloved grandmother. But Vanessa would inevitably appear in the doorway and say, "Emma, don't bother Grandma. She needs her rest." And Emma would leave, looking back at me with confusion in her eyes. 3 weeks into my stay, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I'd gotten up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, moving slowly with my walker. As I made my way back to my room, I heard voices from the kitchen, Daniel and Vanessa, arguing in harsh whispers. "This isn't working," Vanessa said. "She's always here, Daniel. Always in the kitchen, always in the living room. Emma's getting too attached to her." "She's recovering from surgery," Daniel replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "What do you want me to do?" "I want her to go back to her own house," Vanessa hissed. "I want my space back. I want to walk through my own home without tripping over walkers and pill bottles and all her old person things everywhere. Just give it a few more weeks." "No. I've been patient. I've been understanding. But this is my house, Daniel. Mine. I didn't sign up to run a nursing home." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hands gripping my walker so hard my knuckles went white. I waited for Daniel to defend me, to remind his wife that I was his mother, that I'd sacrificed everything for him, that a few months of help was a small price to pay for a lifetime of love. But what I heard instead was a long sigh and then, okay, I'll talk to her. We'll figure something out. I made my way back to my room as quietly as I could and cried into my pillow so no one would hear. The next morning, Daniel knocked on my door and came in with the kind of expression people where when they're about to deliver bad news they're trying to frame as good news. Mom, how's the physical therapy going? You're getting around better, right? I knew where this was heading, but I played along. Yes, much better. The therapist says I'm making good progress. That's great. Really great. He sat on the edge of the bed, not quite looking at me. So Vanessa and I were thinking, maybe it's time to think about next steps. For you. Long term. Long term. Yeah. Like this house, our house, it was only supposed to be temporary, right? While you recovered. And now that you're doing better, maybe we should talk about options. Options. That word people use when what they mean is, we need to get rid of you. I see, I said quietly. You want me to go back to my house. Well, that's the thing. Daniel stood up, started pacing. Your house needs a lot of work, Mom. The roof, the furnace, the foundation issues you mentioned. And you're on a fixed income. How are you going to afford all those repairs? I'll figure it out. I always figure it out. Or. He paused, turning to face me with what I now recognize was a carefully rehearsed expression. We could sell your house. Use the money to get you into a nice assisted living facility. Somewhere with people your own age, activities, around-the-clock care if you need it. My chest tightened. Assisted living? Daniel, I'm 70 years old, not 90. I don't need around-the-clock care. But you did need it. You fell, Mom. You broke your hip. What if it happens again and no one's there to help? What if I don't want to live in some facility surrounded by strangers? It's not a facility, it's a community. And they're really nice now. Not like the old nursing homes. I've been researching them. Of course he had. He'd been planning this, researching my disposal like a project he needed to complete. And what about my house? We sell it. The market's good right now. We could probably get 180, maybe 200,000 for it. That would cover several years in a good assisted living place. We. He kept saying we. As if my house, the home I'd bought with money I'd earned, the place I'd raised him, was somehow a joint asset he had a right to liquidate. That's my house, Daniel. I know, Mom. I know. But be practical. You can't maintain it alone. And you can't live here permanently. He caught himself, but the truth had already escaped. I couldn't live there permanently because I wasn't wanted there permanently. I was an inconvenience, a problem to be solved, a burden to be shifted somewhere out of sight. Let me think about it, I said because I didn't know what else to say. But Daniel had momentum now, and people with momentum don't like to be slowed down. Over the next few weeks, he brought home brochures for assisted living facilities. He pointed out problems with my house every time he visited it, which was often, I noticed, even though he'd rarely visited when I lived there alone. The crack in the basement wall. The water damage in the bathroom. The outdated electrical system. Every flaw was evidence that I needed to sell, to give up, to accept that I was too old and broken to maintain my independence. Vanessa grew less subtle about wanting me gone. She started sighing loudly whenever I was in the common areas. She'd make pointed comments about how crowded the house felt, how she couldn't wait to reclaim the guest room for her home office. She stopped pretending to be polite. And Daniel, my son whom I'd raised alone and sacrificed everything for, said nothing to defend me. He'd just look uncomfortable and change the subject. For months after I moved in, I overheard another conversation. This time I wasn't even trying to eavesdrop. They were talking in the living room in normal voices, apparently confident I was asleep or too deaf to hear. But I heard every word. She's still dragging her feet on the house, Vanessa said. It's been months, Daniel. Months of her being here, taking up space, making everything complicated. Taking up space. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Taking up space as if my presence was nothing more than an obstacle. A piece of furniture awkwardly placed where it didn't belong. I know, Daniel said. I'm working on it. Work harder. I can't do this much longer. Emma's starting to think having your grandmother live with us is normal. She doesn't understand boundaries. And frankly, neither does your mother. What do you want me to do, Vanessa? I want you to be firm with her. Stop letting her guilt you with those sad eyes and trembling lip. Tell her she needs to sell the house and move into one of those facilities. Or better yet, go back to her house and figure it out herself. But she can't stay here. She just can't. There was a long pause. Then Daniel said so quietly I almost didn't hear. You're right. I'll talk to her tomorrow. I'll make it clear. He did talk to me the next day. I was in the kitchen washing the breakfast dishes. Emma had gone to preschool, and Vanessa had left for work with barely a nod in my direction. Daniel came in while I was drying a plate, and I could tell from his expression that this was the conversation I'd been dreading. Mom, we need to talk. I set down the plate carefully. About what? About the situation. Your situation. You've been here for 4 months now. I know. And I'm grateful. But it's not working, Mom. He said it flatly, with none of the careful diplomacy he'd used before. Vanessa and I, we need our space. Our privacy. And you living here. It's putting a strain on our marriage. I try to stay out of the way. It's not about staying out of the way. It's about you being here at all. He ran his hand through his hair, frustration evident. You need to go back to your house or make the decision to sell it and move into assisted living. But you can't stay here anymore. You need to understand that. I do understand, I said quietly. I understand perfectly. Good. So what's your decision? Because Vanessa wants a timeline. She wants to know when she can have her house back. Her house. Not their house. Not the family home. Her house, where I was an unwanted guest who'd overstayed my welcome. When do you want me to leave? I asked. 2 weeks. Is that enough time to arrange something? 2 weeks to dismantle my life, to decide between returning to a house I could barely maintain or surrendering to an institution I didn't want. 2 weeks after 70 years of putting others first, of sacrificing my own needs and wants and dreams for the people I loved. 2 weeks. That's fine, I said. Daniel looked relieved, actually relieved. Great. Okay. I think this is the right decision, Mom. For everyone. But it was the next evening when the words came that broke me completely. I'd made dinner, old habit, wanting to be useful, wanting to contribute something even though I knew I wasn't wanted. It wasn't anything fancy, just spaghetti and meatballs, but I'd made it from scratch the way Daniel used to love when he was a child. I'd spent the afternoon at the stove, standing for longer than my physical therapist would have approved, but I wanted to do this. One last family meal before I left their lives. Vanessa came home first, saw me in the kitchen, and her face hardened. You didn't need to cook, Margaret. I wanted to. I thought it would be nice to. We were going to order sushi. She pulled out her phone, started texting. Daniel and I had plans. When Daniel arrived, he looked at the table I'd set, the food I'd prepared, and his expression was more annoyed than grateful. We sat down anyway, the three of us, because what else could we do with a full meal already on the table? Emma was at a playdate, so it was just the adults, sitting in uncomfortable silence while I tried to pretend everything was normal. Vanessa picked at her food, making it clear she wasn't enjoying it. Daniel ate mechanically, checking his phone between bites. And I sat there watching my family, seeing clearly for the first time how much I didn't belong in their perfect, expensive life. I was just an embarrassing remnant of the past, a reminder of the poverty and struggle Daniel had worked so hard to escape. After dinner, I started clearing the dishes. Daniel was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Vanessa had gone upstairs to change. I was carrying plates to the kitchen when Daniel spoke without looking up from his screen. You know, Mom, you really need to stop trying so hard to be involved in our lives. I paused in the doorway, plates in hand. What? All of this? He gestured vaguely at the kitchen, at me, at everything. The cooking, the hovering, the constantly being around. You're taking up space. That's all. Just taking up space that we need for our actual lives. Taking up space. There it was, said directly to my face with casual cruelty. I wasn't a person to him anymore, wasn't his mother, wasn't the woman who'd raised him alone and sacrificed everything for his success. I was just an inconvenient object, like an old piece of furniture that no longer matched the decor. An obstacle taking up valuable space in his perfectly curated life. I stood there, frozen, waiting for him to realize what he'd said, to apologize, to show any sign that he understood how deeply those words cut. But he just kept scrolling through his phone. completely unaware or uncaring that he just reduced his mother to nothing more than a spatial problem. I set down the plates carefully because my hands were shaking. "I see," I said quietly. "Don't take it personally, Mom. It's just reality. We all have to face reality eventually." I went to my room, the guest room I'd been occupying for 4 months, and closed the door. Then I sat on the bed and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. My son, the baby I'd cradled and fed and protected, the child I'd worked 3 jobs to support, the young man I'd sent to college with pride and hope in my heart, had just told me I was nothing more than an inconvenience taking up space. But here's what Daniel didn't understand. Space isn't just about physical square footage. Space is about presence, about impact, about the room you command in the world and in people's lives. He thought I was taking up space in his house, disrupting the neat lines of his comfortable existence. He had no idea how much space I actually occupied in the world, how much I'd built, how much I mattered to people who weren't too self-absorbed to notice. And I decided right then, sitting in that impersonal guest room surrounded by my meager belongings, that I was going to show them exactly what space really meant. I was going to show them that I commanded more space than they could possibly imagine. That dismissing me was the biggest mistake they'd ever made. That I was not, and had never been, someone who could be casually discarded. But first I needed to make a call. There was someone I'd been avoiding, someone who'd reached out to me several times over the past few months while I was recovering. Someone who valued me in ways my own family never had. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to her number. Elena Rodriguez, the woman who ran the community center in my old neighborhood. Elena and I had worked together for years. After Daniel left for college, I'd had more free time despite my jobs, and I'd started volunteering at the community center. It had started small, helping with food bank distributions on Saturday mornings, but had grown into something more substantial. I coordinated volunteers. I organized fundraisers. I helped design programs for low-income families who needed support. Elena had told me multiple times that I was the heart of the operation, that the center wouldn't function without me. I'd stopped volunteering after my fall, obviously. I'd been too focused on recovery, too consumed with physical therapy, and then the misery of living in Daniel's house. Elena had called several times, but I'd let the calls go to voicemail, too exhausted and depressed to explain what was happening. Her last message, left 2 weeks ago, had been more urgent. "Margaret, I really need to talk to you. Please call me back. It's important." I called her back that night. She answered on the second ring. "Margaret. Oh my God, I've been so worried about you. Are you okay?" Just hearing her voice, full of genuine concern, made my eyes well up. "I'm managing. How are you?" "Honestly? Drowning. The center is falling apart without you. The volunteer schedule is a disaster. The food bank distribution is chaos. And we have a huge problem that I really need your help with." "What kind of problem?" "Do you remember Mrs. Chen's building? The one that's been threatened with demolition?" I sat up straighter. Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor who'd helped me so much over the years, lived in a rent-controlled apartment building that had been targeted by developers. They wanted to tear it down and build luxury condos. What's happening with it? The developers are moving forward. If we don't stop them, 38 families are going to lose their homes. Most of them are elderly, low-income. They have nowhere to go. I'm organizing a community response, but I need someone who knows how to mobilize people, who understands the system. I need you, Margaret. Taking up space. Daniel's words echoed in my head. He thought I was taking up space, being useless, contributing nothing. But here was Elena telling me that people needed me, that I had skills and knowledge and value, that I commanded space in a community that actually wanted me there. "When do we start?" I asked. Over the next 2 weeks, while I was supposedly making arrangements to leave Daniel's house, I threw myself into saving Mrs. Chen's building. I coordinated with Elena over the phone and laptop. I reached out to other community activists I'd worked with over the years. I contacted local journalists about the story. I organized a protest at City Hall. I helped file paperwork for historic building designation. I wrote compelling narratives about the families who would be displaced. And something remarkable happened. I remembered who I was. Not Daniel's mother. Not Vanessa's inconvenient house guest. Just Margaret. A woman who got things done. A woman who fought for people. A woman who mattered. I also made another call, this one to a lawyer I'd met through the community center. Her name was Patricia Mills, and she specialized in helping low-income clients with housing issues. I'd connected her with several families over the years, and she told me more than once that if I ever needed legal help, she'd be there for me. Patricia, it's Margaret Hanson. Margaret, how wonderful to hear from you. What can I do for you? I need advice. About my house. I explained the situation, the needed repairs, my limited income, Daniel's pressure to sell. Patricia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a thoughtful pause. Here's what I think, she finally said. You have options you may not have considered. There are programs for senior citizens to get grants for home repairs. There are property tax relief programs. There are even reverse mortgage options that would let you access your home equity without selling. But more importantly, Margaret, you don't have to make any decision you don't want to make. That's your house, your asset. And no one, not even your son, has the right to pressure you into giving it up. Those words unlock something in me. My house, my asset, my decision. For months I'd felt powerless, as if my age and injury had stripped me of agency. But I still had power. I still had rights. I still had choices. Can you help me explore those options? I asked. It would be my honor. On my last day in Daniel's house, the deadline he'd given me to leave, I woke up early. I'd already moved most of my things back to my house over the past few days, with help from Elena and some volunteers from the community center. The house still needed repairs, but Patricia had helped me apply for a county program that provided interest-free loans for seniors to fix critical issues. The roof would be patched next week. The furnace would be replaced next month. I'd figure out the rest as I went along. I made breakfast for Emma before she went to preschool, my last chance to spend time with my granddaughter for what might be a while. She climbed into my lap while we waited for her waffles to toast, and I memorized the weight of her, the smell of her strawberry shampoo, the sound of her chattering about her upcoming field trip to the zoo. Will you come to the zoo with us, Grandma? She asked. Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared in the doorway. Emma, Grandma's leaving today. She's going back to her own house. Emma's face crumpled. But why? I want Grandma to stay. Because Grandma has her own life, sweetie. And we have ours. The casual cruelty of it, spoken in that bright, false voice people use with children when they're saying something terrible. I hugged Emma tighter and whispered in her ear. I'll always be your grandma. Always. And I'll see you soon. Though I had no idea if that was true. Daniel came down eventually, dressed for work, barely looking at me. All set? He asked. Yes. Good. I'll help you load the last boxes into your car. We carried the remaining items in silence. When the car was packed, Daniel stood in the driveway, hands in his pockets, looking like he couldn't wait for me to leave. No hug goodbye. No thank you for everything. No acknowledgement that this was his mother driving away, possibly forever. Take care of yourself, Mom, he said, the kind of thing you say to a casual acquaintance, not to the woman who gave you life. I will, I said. I always do. I drove away without looking back. If I'd looked back, I might have cried, and I was done crying over people who didn't value me. I had work to do. I had a community that needed me. I had a space to occupy, one that was mine, earned and deserved and real. The protest at City Hall happened 3 days after I moved back home. Elena and I had organized it with the help of dozens of volunteers. We had signs. We had chants. We had media coverage. But more than that, we had stories. Real stories from real people about what losing their homes would mean. Mrs. Chun spoke about living in her apartment for 40 years. Raising her own children there, building her life there. Others spoke about fixed incomes and limited options and the terror of displacement in your old age. I spoke too. I stood at that microphone, 70 years old with a still healing hip, and I told the story of fighting to keep your dignity when the world tells you you're disposable. I didn't mention Daniel by name, but I spoke about being told you're taking up space when really you're creating space for others. Space for community. Space for justice. Space for people to be seen and heard and valued. The local news covered it. There was an article in the paper the next day with a photo of me at the microphone, my white hair catching the sunlight, my expression determined. The headline read, Local activist leads fight to save rent-controlled building. Local activist. They called me an activist. Me, Margaret Hanson, who'd spent most of her life just trying to survive. But here's where the story gets interesting. 3 days after that article ran, I got a call from someone I didn't know. A woman named Jennifer who ran a nonprofit organization that provided legal services to low-income seniors. She'd seen the article. She'd been impressed by how I'd mobilized the community. And she had a proposition. We need someone to run our community outreach program, Jennifer said. Someone who understands the senior community, who has connections, who can identify people who need help and connect them with resources. It's a paid position. Not a fortune but decent pay with benefits. And I think you'd be perfect for it. I almost dropped the phone. A job. An actual paid position doing work that mattered, work that I was apparently good at. I'm 70 years old, I said. So? Age isn't disqualifying. Experience is valuable. Your experience is valuable. Are you interested? Was I interested? I'd spent the last year feeling like my life was ending, like I had nothing left to contribute, like I was just waiting to be warehoused in some assisted living facility. And here was someone offering me a job, a purpose, a space to occupy in the world that came with a paycheck and benefits and the explicit message. You matter. Yes, I said. I'm very interested. I started the job 2 weeks later. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was more than I'd made at the grocery store. And the benefits included health insurance that was better than anything I'd had in decades. More importantly, the work was fulfilling. I spent my days connecting with seniors in need, helping them navigate the complex systems of social services, organizing support groups and educational workshops. I was good at it. People sought me out specifically, told their friends about Margaret from the Senior Services nonprofit, came to me with their problems because they knew I'd actually help. I was undeniably taking up space. I had an office small but mine. I had business cards with my title, Community Outreach Coordinator. I had colleagues who respected me and supervisors who valued my input. I had a presence and impact, a measurable positive effect on the world around me. The fight to save Mrs. Chen's building took 4 months, but we won. The City Council voted to grant the building historic designation, which protected it from demolition. The developers weren't happy, but the families who got to keep their homes were overjoyed. Mrs. Chan hugged me at the celebration party and cried on my shoulder, thanking me over and over. You saved us, she kept saying. But really they'd saved me. They'd given me purpose when I'd felt purposeless. They'd given me value when my own family had made me feel worthless. The story got more media coverage. I was interviewed for a local news segment about community activism and aging. I talked about how society often dismisses elderly people as if their usefulness has expired, but that in reality, seniors have wisdom, experience, and capacity that communities desperately need. I talked about taking up space not as an apology but as a declaration. I'm here. I matter. I'm not going anywhere. I didn't hear from Daniel at all during this time. Not a call, not a text, not a message asking how I was doing. It was as if I'd ceased to exist for him once I was no longer his problem to manage. Fine. I was busy anyway. I had a life, a real life, full of meaning and connection and accomplishment. Then 6 months after I'd left his house, Daniel called. Not because he wanted to talk to me, I realized quickly, but because he needed something. Mom, hi. It's been a while. Yes. It has. I didn't make it easy for him. I didn't rush to fill the silence with reassurances that I wasn't hurt, that everything was fine. So, I've been seeing your name in the news. That stuff with the apartment building and now this nonprofit job. That's great. Thank you. Listen, I'm calling because Vanessa's mother is having some issues. She's 73, and she's been having trouble managing her finances, keeping up with her bills. Vanessa's worried about her. And I thought maybe you could help? Since you work with seniors now, maybe connect her with some resources. The audacity was breathtaking. After dismissing me as someone who was just taking up space, who contributed nothing, who needed to be removed from his life, he wanted to use my expertise and connections to help his mother-in-law. He wanted me to take up space in his life again, but only in the ways that benefited him. That's not really how it works, Daniel. I work with low-income seniors who are in crisis situations. Is Vanessa's mother low-income? Well, no, but then she should hire a financial advisor, or an elder care consultant, or any of the many services that exist for people who can afford them. The resources I connect people with are for those who have no other options. I just thought you could help. As a favor. For family. Family. That word he'd forgotten when I actually needed help, when I was broken and scared and displaced. We don't talk for 6 months, and now you want a favor? I've been busy, Mom. Work has been crazy. Too busy to call your mother even once? To check if I'm okay? If I'm managing? If I'm even alive? I figured you were fine. You always land on your feet. Because I have to, Daniel. Because no one's going to catch me if I fall. Certainly not you. There was a long silence. Then, in a voice that carried an edge of something I hadn't heard from him in years, defensiveness, maybe even guilt, he said, "What do you want me to say, Mom?" "Nothing. I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to understand that I'm not a resource you can use when convenient and ignore when I'm not. I'm a person. Your mother. And I deserve basic respect and consideration. This isn't fair. I let you live with us. You let me? Let me? Daniel, I didn't ask to fall and break my hip. I didn't ask to need help. And when I did need it, when I lived in your house for 4 months, you made it very clear that I was an unwanted burden. You told me explicitly that I was just taking up space. Do you remember that?" Another silence, longer this time. I was frustrated that day. You were honest that day. You said what you really felt. That I was worthless, useless, nothing more than an obstacle in your way. So I left. And I built a life. A good life. A life where I matter, where I contribute, where people actually want me around. And now you call, after 6 months of silence, to ask me for a favor. Mom, I'll email you some resources for Vanessa's mother. General information that anyone could Google. But don't call me again unless you actually want to talk to me, your mother, as a person you care about. Not as someone you can use when you need something. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear or sadness. It was from the rush of standing up for myself, of setting a boundary, of refusing to be diminished. I'd spent my whole life accommodating, sacrificing, making myself smaller so others could be comfortable. But I was done with that. I was taking up space and I wasn't apologizing for it anymore. A week later, I got a certified letter in the mail. My heart sank when I saw the return address. Daniel and Vanessa's law firm. Were they suing me? For what? But when I opened it, the contents were somehow worse. It was a legal document declaring that, due to concerns about Margaret Hanson's diminished capacity and judgment, they were seeking to establish a conservatorship over my affairs. They wanted legal control over my finances, my medical decisions, my life. The document cited my age, my recent hip fracture, my erratic decision-making, including quitting my job at the grocery store, involuntary medical leave, actually, and engaging in risky activist behavior, my community organizing work. It painted a picture of a confused, incompetent old woman who couldn't manage her own affairs and needed her responsible son to take over for her own protection. I sat at my kitchen table, reading this document that attempted to erase my autonomy, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: rage. Pure clarifying rage. Not sadness. Not hurt. Rage at the manipulation, the gaslighting, the blatant attempt to control me because I dared to live my own life instead of accepting the diminished role they'd assigned me. I called Patricia immediately. I need help. Daniel is trying to establish a conservatorship over me. On what grounds? I read her the document. When I finished, there was a moment of silence then. This is bullshit. Pardon my language, but this is absolute bullshit. You're employed. You're living independently. You're competent and lucid. You've just accomplished a major community organizing victory. This isn't going to fly, Margaret. But we need to fight it, and we need to fight it hard. I want to fight it. I want to fight them. Good. Because we're going to win. The court hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In that time, Patricia and I built a case. We documented my employment history, my current job performance, my financial management. We got letters from my employer, from colleagues, from the seniors I'd helped, all testifying to my competence and capability. We got a medical evaluation from my doctor confirming that I had no cognitive impairment, no signs of dementia or diminished capacity. We even got a statement from my physical therapist noting that I'd exceeded expectations in my recovery and was more mobile and independent than many patients half my age. But the most powerful evidence came from the media coverage of the rent-controlled building campaign. Videos of me speaking at protests, giving interviews, organizing community members, photographs of me at work, at community meetings, at city council sessions, a documentary trail showing a woman who was not only competent, but actively making a difference in her community. The day of the hearing arrived. I dressed carefully in my best outfit, nothing expensive but clean and professional. Patricia met me at the courthouse and we walked in together, her hand briefly squeezing my shoulder in solidarity. Daniel and Vanessa were already there with their lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Daniel couldn't meet my eyes. Vanessa looked at me with cold calculation, as if I were a problem she was about to solve permanently. The judge was a woman in her 60s, Judge Barbara Chun, no relation to my neighbor, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed the documents both sides had submitted, then looked at Daniel's lawyer. Counsel, you're alleging that Mrs. Hansen lacks the capacity to manage her affairs. Can you present evidence of this? Daniel's lawyer stood. Your Honor, Mrs. Hansen is 70 years old with a recent history of serious injury requiring surgery. She made the questionable decision to return to an inadequately maintained house rather than accept her family's support or move to an appropriate care facility. She's engaged in risky political activities. Political activities? Judge Chun interrupted. You mean exercising her First Amendment rights? Activities that could put her at risk, Your Honor. Protests, public speaking, confrontational situations like democratic participation in local government. The judge's tone was dry. Continue. We're concerned that Mrs. Hansen is not making decisions in her own best interest. Her son and daughter-in-law are willing to take on the responsibility of managing her affairs to protect her. Judge Chun turned to me. Mrs. Hansen, I'd like to hear from you directly. Can you tell me about your current living situation? I stood, Patricia nodding encouragingly beside me. Your Honor, I live independently in the home I've owned for 45 years. I work full-time as a community outreach coordinator for the Senior Legal Services nonprofit. I manage my own finances, pay my bills on time, and maintain my property with the help of a county assistance program for seniors. I have no cognitive impairment, as confirmed by my physician. I'm physically active and socially engaged. I'm not sure what capacity my son thinks I'm lacking. Can you tell me about the community organizing work mentioned in the petition? I helped lead a successful campaign to prevent the demolition of a rent-controlled apartment building. 38 families, mostly elderly and low-income, were going to lose their homes. We organized protests, attended city council meetings, and ultimately secured historic designation for the building. The residents get to keep their homes. Sounds risky, the judge said with the faintest hint of a smile. Democracy in action. Terrifying stuff. A few people in the courtroom laughed quietly. Daniel's lawyer's face tightened. Your Honor, with respect, age-related decline can be subtle. Mrs. Hansen may appear competent, but she's employed in a responsible position, living independently, successfully navigating complex legal and political systems, and by all accounts thriving. Judge Chun looked at the stack of letters Patricia had submitted. I have here testimonials from her employer, colleagues, community members, medical professionals, all attesting to her competence. I have evidence of successful financial management. I have documentation of her active civic engagement. What I don't have is any credible evidence of diminished capacity. She turned her attention to Daniel. Mr. Hansen, can you tell me why you believe your mother needs a conservatorship? Daniel stood slowly. For the first time he looked uncertain. Your Honor, I'm concerned for her well-being. She's my mother. I want to make sure she's protected. Protected from what, specifically? From making mistakes. From being taken advantage of. From hurting herself. Has she made mistakes that concern you? She went back to her house instead of moving somewhere safer. Her house. That she owns. That she's living in successfully. Judge Chen's patience was clearly wearing thin. Mr. Hansen, I'm going to be very direct with you. Based on the evidence before me, your mother is a competent, capable adult who is living a productive and engaged life. The petition for conservatorship appears to be without merit. In fact, it appears to be an attempt to control an aging parent who has chosen to live independently rather than according to your preferences. This court does not exist to help families force their elders into compliance. Your Honor, that's not. Daniel's lawyer tried to interject. I'm denying the petition, Judge Chun said firmly. Mrs. Hansen has demonstrated more than sufficient capacity to manage her own affairs. Furthermore, I'm concerned about the motivation behind this petition. Mrs. Hansen, do you wish to pursue any protective orders? Patricia leaned over and whispered, we can get a restraining order if you want. Prevent them from trying this again. I looked at Daniel, really looked at him. My son. The baby I'd loved so completely. The child I'd sacrificed everything for. He looked small now, defeated and embarrassed. And I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no lingering love. Just emptiness where those feelings used to be. No, I said quietly. No protective orders. I just want to be left alone. Judge Chen nodded. The petition is denied. Mrs. Hansen retains full autonomy over her affairs. This hearing is concluded. As we filed out of the courtroom, Daniel tried to approach me. Mom, wait. I stopped, turned to face him. Patricia stood beside me, a protective presence. What, Daniel? I didn't mean for it to go this far. Vanessa thought. Don't blame your wife. You signed those papers. You stood up in court and told a judge I was incompetent. You tried to take away the last thing I have, my independence, my dignity, my right to make my own choices. I was trying to help. No. You were trying to control me because I wasn't behaving the way you wanted. Because I dared to build a life that didn't revolve around making you comfortable. Because I took up space in ways you couldn't manage or manipulate. I'm sorry. I don't think you are. I think you're embarrassed that you lost. But sorry? Actually sorry for how you've treated me? I don't believe that for a second. I took a breath. You told me I was just taking up space. And you were right in a way. I was taking up space in your life, space you wanted for other things. So I left. And I found spaces where I'm wanted, where I'm valued. Where my presence is a gift, not a burden. I command more space now than I ever did in your house. I matter to hundreds of people. I make a difference every single day. And I did that without you, despite you, in the face of your dismissal and disrespect. Mom, please. I'm not done. You need to hear this. I spent 43 years putting you first. Every decision I made was about giving you the best life I could provide. I worked myself to exhaustion. I sacrificed my own dreams, my own comfort, my own future. And when I needed you, really needed you, you told me I was just taking up space. So now you don't get space in my life. You had your chance and you wasted it. I'm done. I turned and walked away, Patricia beside me. Daniel called after me, but I didn't turn around. There was nothing more to say. Behind me, I heard Vanessa's sharp voice. Daniel, let her go. This is embarrassing enough. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. Patricia gave me a hug. You were magnificent in there. I just told the truth. The truth delivered magnificently. So what now? Celebration dinner. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Actually, I have a community meeting tonight. We're planning a program to help seniors age in place with dignity. I need to be there. Of course you do. Patricia squeezed my hand. Go take up some space, Margaret. That evening at the community center, I facilitated a meeting with 15 other seniors and several social workers. We discussed challenges, brainstormed solutions, created action plans. I ran the meeting efficiently, made sure everyone was heard, synthesized ideas into concrete next steps. At the end, Elena pulled me aside. You know we're applying for a grant to expand programming, right? I'd heard something about that. I'm writing you into the proposal. Associate director position. Substantial raise. You've earned it, Margaret. This place runs better with you here. The community needs you. Associate director. A title, a position, a formal recognition of my value. I'd be honored, I said. Good. Because you're kind of essential around here. Don't tell anyone. But you're the secret sauce that makes everything work. I went home that night to my small, imperfect house that was mine. I made myself dinner, watched the news, worked on some planning documents for the next community meeting. It was a quiet evening, unremarkable to anyone looking from the outside. But to me it was everything. It was independence. It was dignity. It was the space I'd created for myself in the world. 3 months later, the nonprofits grant came through. I was officially promoted to associate director with a salary that, while not lavish, was comfortable. Enough to maintain my house, cover my bills, and even save a little. More importantly, the position came with respect and authority. I hired staff. I designed programs. I represented the organization at city meetings and conferences. I was interviewed by journalists researching stories about aging and activism. My opinion mattered. My expertise was sought. My presence commanded space in rooms where decisions were made. I saw Mrs. Chun regularly, either at the community center or when I stopped by her apartment to check on her. She'd become something of a friend and surrogate family member, filling the grandmother role that my own family had rejected. One afternoon she made tea and we sat in her small kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. "You know," Mrs. Chun said thoughtfully, "I watched you with your little Daniel when he was growing up. How you loved him. How much you put into that boy. I remember thinking you were either the most selfless mother I'd ever seen, or the saddest one, because I could tell you were giving pieces of yourself away that you'd never get back." "I loved him," I said simply. "I still do. That doesn't change." "Love and respect are different things," Mrs. Chun replied. "He didn't understand that. Some people never do. But I'm grateful for what you taught me, Margaret. You showed me that love without boundaries can become enabling. That sacrifice without appreciation can breed resentment. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away." "Are you talking about your own family?" Mrs. Chun had mentioned years ago that her relationship with her children was complicated. "I'm talking about life," she said. "But yes, I called my daughter yesterday. First time in 3 years. I told her I missed her, but that I wouldn't accept being treated like a nuisance anymore. That if she wanted a relationship with me, it had to be based on mutual respect. I don't know if it will work out, but I'm not going to spend my remaining years begging for affection from people who don't deserve it." What did she say? She cried. Then she asked if I could come visit next month. "So maybe we're starting over." I squeezed her hand. This was the power of real community, real relationships. They modeled what was possible. They gave each other permission to expect better, to demand respect, to not settle for crumbs of acknowledgement from people who should have been feeding us with generosity and love. 2 years after the court hearing, I was invited to speak at a state conference on aging policy. The keynote organizers had seen footage of my activism, read about my work with seniors, and thought my perspective would be valuable. I'd never given a major public speech before, and I was terrified. But Patricia encouraged me, and Elena offered to help me prepare. And so I found myself in a hotel ballroom in front of 300 policymakers, social workers, advocates, and journalists, with my hands shaking slightly as I approached the microphone. "I was told once that I was just taking up space," I began, "by someone whose opinion I thought mattered more than my own. And in that moment I believed it. I believed I'd become a burden, an inconvenience, something to be managed and removed. But what I've learned, through living and working in community with others, is that space is never just physical. Space is power. Space is voice. Space is the right to exist and matter and be heard. Every single one of us takes up space. The question is, what kind of space will we choose to occupy?" I talked about the systemic erasure of elderly people, how society pushed them to the margins, how we were encouraged to see aging as an inconvenience rather than an inevitable part of life. I talked about the untapped potential in senior communities, the experience, the wisdom, the capacity for continued growth and contribution. I talked about my own experience of being dismissed, and how it had crystallized my determination to refuse that narrative. When my son told me I was just taking up space, I continued. He meant it as an insult, but I took it as a challenge. I asked myself, what kind of space do I actually occupy? And the answer surprised me. I occupy space in the lives of 38 families who get to keep their homes. I occupy space in the hearts of seniors who feel seen and heard for the first time in years. I occupy space in community meetings and city councils and social service organizations. I occupy space in the future I'm helping to build, where aging isn't something to be ashamed of or hidden away, but something to be celebrated as a continuation of meaningful life. I paused, looking out at the audience. There is a revolution happening in this country right now. It's quiet, but it's powerful. It's happening in community centers and living rooms and courtrooms. It's happening when elders refuse to be dismissed, when they organize, when they demand respect and dignity, when they continue to contribute and grow and matter. That revolution is built by people who understand that taking up space isn't something to apologize for. It's something to do deliberately, with purpose and power. The applause was immediate and sustained. People stood as I left the stage, and I felt something I'd never felt before. The recognition that my voice, my presence, my story mattered not just to my immediate community, but to the larger conversation about aging and rights and dignity. Later, journalists wanted to interview me. Organizations wanted me to consult on their programs. Universities wanted me to speak to their social work students. My calendar filled up, and I found myself in demand in ways I'd never imagined possible. Margaret Hanson, the woman her own son had tried to declare incompetent, had become a recognized voice in policy discussions about aging and community care. And through it all, I maintained my commitment to the people in my community who needed me most. I still worked at the nonprofit, still showed up to Friday afternoon food bank distributions, still hosted a weekly support group for seniors dealing with family estrangement. I was simultaneously becoming more visible in the larger world and more grounded in my immediate community. That paradox seemed exactly right to me. 3 years after I left Daniel's house, I got a call I didn't expect. It was Emma, my granddaughter. She was 9 years old now, and she'd managed to get my phone number from her school counselor, who had apparently recognized her last name and made a connection when Emma mentioned wanting to call her grandmother. "Hi, Grandma," she said tentatively. "It's Emma." My heart constricted. "Emma. Oh, Emma. I know Mom and Dad said I shouldn't call you, but I remembered you. I remembered how you used to read to me and let me help in the kitchen and tell me stories. And I wanted to hear your voice again." We talked for 40 minutes. Emma told me about school, about her friends, about her interests in science and art. I told her about my work, about the community center, about the apartment building we'd saved. And then carefully I asked, "Emma, why did your mom say you shouldn't call me?" "I don't know exactly. Dad said you wanted to do your own thing and didn't have time for us anymore. But I looked you up online and found articles about your work and it seemed like maybe you were doing good things? And I thought maybe they weren't telling me the truth." Out of the mouths of babes. My 9-year-old granddaughter had more clarity about the situation than anyone. "The truth is complicated, Emma. Your parents and I don't see things the same way. But that doesn't mean I stopped caring about you. Never. I think about you all the time. Could we maybe see each other sometime? Like if you came here or I came to you. I'd like that very much. Let me talk to your parents about it." Of course I had to call Daniel. He was furious when I told him Emma had called me. "You told her to call you?" "I did no such thing. She found my number and called. And I'm not going to pretend I'm not happy to hear from her. Emma is 9 years old. She's impressionable. She doesn't understand. She understands that her grandmother loves her, and that she loves her grandmother. That's all that matters. Vanessa doesn't want you in Emma's life. I don't want you using her as a way back into our family. I'm not trying to get back into your family. I've built a full and meaningful life without you. But Emma is my granddaughter, and I'm not going to cut her off just because you and your wife decided I was inconvenient. You can decide if you want a relationship with me. I'm clear that you don't, but Emma gets to make her own choices. She's old enough for that. You're being manipulative. I'm being honest. And if you won't let me see Emma voluntarily, you should know that I have a lawyer, and will explore my rights as a grandparent. But I'd prefer to do this cooperatively." There was a long silence. Then Daniel said quietly, "I don't know who you've become, Mom." "Yes, you do," I replied. "I've become who I always was, underneath the sacrifices and the accommodations and the willingness to take up as little space as possible. I just stopped apologizing for it." He hung up after that. But 2 weeks later, Emma was dropped off at my house for an afternoon. Vanessa barely made eye contact. And she made very clear that Emma had to be back by 5 o'clock precisely. Daniel sat in the car looking uncomfortable, while Emma ran up to my door with such joy and eagerness that it broke my heart all over again. "Grandma!" She threw her arms around me and I held her, breathing in the smell of her children's shampoo, marveling at how much she'd grown, how much I'd missed. We spent the afternoon in the simplest pleasures. I let her help me bake cookies. We looked through old photo albums, and I told her stories about her father as a child, about what a sweet, sensitive boy he'd been before he became so focused on achievement and image. We sat on my porch and looked at the neighborhood, and Emma asked me about my work. "My friend's mom said you're like a superhero," Emma said. "She said you saved her grandmother from being put in a bad nursing home." "I don't know if that makes me a superhero," I said. "But I helped her find resources and options. That's what I do. I help people find choices they didn't know they had." "That's pretty superheroish to me," Emma said firmly. At 4:45, Vanessa was already texting. We gathered Emma's things, and as I walked her to the car, she hugged me again. "Can I come back?" she asked. "I'd like that very much. Even if Mom and Dad don't want you around? Your mother and father are adults who make their own choices. But you're becoming an adult too. And you get to make your own choices about who's in your life. As long as your parents allow it, I'd love to see you." "I'll make them let me come," Emma said with the fierce determination of childhood. "I'll tell them I want to spend time with my grandmother." And somehow, miraculously, it worked. Emma's persistence wore down Daniel's resistance, probably because he didn't want to deal with the conflict. Once a month, she came to spend an afternoon with me. We baked and talked and built a relationship that existed separately from her parents' rejection of me. And slowly, through Emma's eyes and Emma's insistence, Daniel began to see me differently. Took another year, but one day Daniel called, not aggressively, not with an agenda, just to talk. "How are you doing, Mom?" he asked. "I'm doing well. Really well. How are you?" "Okay. Busy with work. Emma's been talking about you a lot lately. She's a wonderful girl. I'm so grateful I get to spend time with her. Yeah, she seems really happy when she comes to see you. Happy in a way she doesn't always seem at home, if I'm being honest." I didn't want to criticize him or his wife, so I just said, "Children thrive when they feel loved and safe." "I know." He paused, and I could sense him gathering courage. "Mom, I owe you an apology. For a lot of things. For the conservatorship attempt, for the things I said when you were living with us, for blaming you for being sick and hurt. I was ashamed, I think, of where you came from, of the poverty of having to struggle. When you moved in with us, you reminded me of all of that. And instead of dealing with my shame, I projected it onto you." I felt tears prick my eyes. This wasn't everything. It didn't undo the hurt or magically restore our relationship, but it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was growth. Thank you for saying that, Daniel. I appreciate it. Do you think we could try to rebuild things? Slowly? I don't expect you to just forget everything, but I think, I said carefully, that we can develop a new kind of relationship. One where we see each other clearly and respect each other's autonomy. I'm not interested in going back to how things were. But moving forward? Yes, I think that's possible. And slowly we did rebuild. Not to the place we'd been before. That place had never really been healthy, built as it was on my endless sacrifice and his unconscious entitlement. But to something new. Something more honest. He and Vanessa began to attend some of the nonprofit's community events. They saw the work I was doing, understood the impact I was having. They saw me not as a burden but as a person with value and agency and accomplishments. It didn't happen overnight. Vanessa remained cool toward me, and I think she always would be. But she at least accepted my presence, and that was enough. What mattered more was that Emma had a grandmother who was actively part of her life, that Daniel had the opportunity to rebuild a relationship with his mother, based on respect rather than expectation or resentment. 5 years after I left his house, Margaret Hansen, Associate Director of Senior Legal Services, was featured in a magazine profile titled, "The Grandmother Who Refused to Disappear." The article chronicled my journey from being told I was just taking up space to becoming a recognized advocate for seniors' rights. It included interviews with people I'd helped, colleagues I worked with, community members whose lives had been touched by my efforts. There was also an interview with Daniel, who spoke thoughtfully about his own journey of understanding what it meant to respect his mother's autonomy. I thought I was being helpful by trying to manage her life, he said. But what I was really doing was denying her the right to make her own choices. My mother spent her whole life sacrificing for me. When she needed care, the least I could have done was respect her wishes and support her choices, even when they weren't choices I would have made. Instead, I made it about what I wanted, what would be convenient for me. That's something I'm still working through with a therapist, if I'm honest. When I read that quote, I felt something shift in my chest. My son wasn't perfect, and our relationship would never be what some people's were. But he was trying. He was willing to examine his own behavior and grow from it. And that mattered. The article ended with a quote from me. I was told I was just taking up space. But space isn't passive. It's something you command through your choices, your actions, your values. Every day I choose to take up space in this community. I choose to be present, to contribute, to matter. And no one can take that away from me. The lesson I'd offer to anyone, especially women, especially seniors, is this: don't apologize for taking up space. Fill it deliberately, courageously, authentically. That's where your power lies. The profile went viral. I got thousands of messages from people who saw themselves in my story. Women who'd been made to feel small by their families and found the courage to leave. Seniors who'd been dismissed and forgotten and felt validated by my success. Activists and organizers who cited the work I'd done as inspiration. I became, almost accidentally, a symbol of something larger than myself. But I remained rooted in my community. I didn't let the attention change me or pull me away from the work that actually mattered. The concrete, daily work of helping people navigate complex systems, organizing community responses to injustice, building networks of support and care. The magazine profile was nice, but it didn't change the fact that Mrs. Chun still needed help managing her medication, or that a senior named Robert still needed someone to help him understand his eviction notice, or that a dozen other people still needed what only I could provide. On my 75th birthday, the community center held a celebration for me. It was the kind of thing that would have embarrassed me when I was younger, all that attention and fuss. But I'd learned that accepting appreciation was a way of taking up space too. People came from all over. Clients I'd helped, colleagues I'd worked with, friends I'd made through the years, even Elena, who'd introduced me to this whole world of advocacy and possibility. Emma made a speech. She was 14 now, talking about her grandmother with an eloquence and affection that made me cry. My grandmother taught me that growing older isn't about becoming less important. It's about becoming more intentional with the space you occupy. She refused to accept being dismissed. She refused to be invisible. And by doing that, she made it easier for all of us to refuse it too. Daniel stood during the applause and put his arm around me, not in the stiff, uncomfortable way he used to, but naturally, like he was proud to be standing next to me. Vanessa smiled from her seat, a real smile, not the cold, calculated one I'd grown used to. And I thought about that moment in his living room, the moment he'd told me I was just taking up space. How broken I'd felt. How small. How convinced I was that he was right, that I was nothing more than an obstacle in the way of his perfect life. But I'd been wrong. And more importantly, I'd known it. Somewhere deep inside, I'd known that being alive, being present, being engaged with the world and the people in it, that was never just taking up space. That was mattering. That was having value that couldn't be measured in convenience or utility or the way you made other people feel. I'd taken up space deliberately, courageously, authentically. And in doing so, I'd filled that space with meaning, with impact, with love for my community and by extension, love for myself. The story could end there, with the birthday celebration and the reconciliation with Daniel, and the acknowledgement of my accomplishments. But real life doesn't end with neat conclusions. It continues forward, messier and more complex and more beautiful than any ending could capture. After the birthday party, I went home to my little house that I'd fought to keep. I made myself tea and sat on my porch, looking out at the neighborhood that had become so dear to me. Mrs. Chun was in her building, where she still lived after all these years, thanks to the campaign we'd run together. The community center was preparing for tomorrow's support group meeting. Elena was probably at home, thinking about new programs we discussed. Emma was in her room, probably thinking about her grandmother with the kind of love that doesn't need to be constantly expressed to be real. And I was here taking up space. Taking up the space I'd earned through decades of sacrifice and hard work and refusal to disappear. Taking up space not apologetically, not grudgingly but proudly. Knowing that my presence mattered. Knowing that my voice counted. Knowing that my life, my choices, my contributions, they all meant something. I picked up my phone and texted Elena. Same time next week for our planning meeting? She responded immediately. Wouldn't miss it. You bring the coffee. I'll bring the coffee, I typed back, smiling. And that was my life now. Coffee meetings and planning sessions and community work. Phone calls with my granddaughter and slowly rebuilding relationships with my son. Work that mattered and people who valued me in space. Real meaningful space that I commanded with every choice I made, and every morning I woke up to a new day. I had been told I was just taking up space. And they were right. I was taking up space. But not the kind of space they meant. I was taking up space in the world. Space for others to see what was possible. Space for community to flourish. Space for change to happen. Space for love to exist beyond the confines of family obligation. That space was everything. And I refused to apologize for it anymore.